Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. It's now time to talk about the evils of hate speech and fake news, and why it may have become necessary to be more guarded in expressing opinions capable of fanning the embers of disunity in Nigeria. Joining us now to look at all of that is Professor Stanley Ngwa, who is in our Abuja studio. Professor Ngwa is the director of the Olusegun Obasanjo for African Studies at the National Open University of Nigeria. And here with us in Lagos is Ray Epo, a frontline journalist, writer, and essayist, and award winner. Mr. Epo, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you very much. Professor Ngwa, good morning. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, Ruben, and good morning, everybody.
Yes, good morning, Prof. Well, let's start with you. Your department, the Olusegun Obasanjo Center for African Studies at UCAS, at the National Open University of Nigeria, recently organized a colloquium on hate speech and fake news. Why hate speech? Why fake news at this time within the context of the socio-political reality of Nigeria?
Well, Ruben, fake news is not new. Fake news is the harbinger of a hate speech. But fake news is very dangerous. It is threatening, and within the context of our political environment today, those who go out to talk about war know nothing about war, because if there were to be war, it would take the tired, frustrated, unemployed youths to go out there to do the shooting. And that's why we say that hate speech, it's very dangerous, because fake news brings about a hate speech. That is why we at UCAS considered fake news and hate speech a dominant paradigm in our political environment, in the sense that if we don't do anything, I do not think it will be okay with us. And that's why we did what we did, because the center, it's a hub of intellectual exchange committed to the production of empirical scientific research that is problem-driven and policy-relevant.
Prof, will you consider the Ruga Settlement Initiative and the conversation around terrorism, banditry, and kidnapping in Nigeria as examples of fake news or hate speech, given the ongoing conversation in the country?
Of course, the stylistic pyrotechnics, the psychobabbling that accompanies Ruga, to my mind, it generates a whole lot of hate, in the sense that the typical, stereotypical approach to trying to get out a particular section of the country and put all blames on them, even when armed robbers visit your house. It's a Fulani herdsman. I mean, we know when we see Fulani herdsmen, but the circumstances in which we find ourselves, it is very wrong to put every blame and every crime on a particular ethnic group. This is why we say that fake news is dangerous and fake news is a harbinger of hate speech. I mean, if you have to put every blame, every crime committed on a particular group of people, I don't think you're helping the country. The polity is already overheated. And I also take the view that quite a lot of people who do this psychobabbling thing have political scores to settle. You are at liberty to amuse yourself, but please don't do that at the expense of the country. Look, if you take a look at the issue of the passport, Fulani herdsman. I mean, if anybody were to complain, I'm an Ijaw. I suppose nobody is there to complain more than the Ijaw. I didn't see the fisherman in the passport. But I think every section of this country is properly reflected in that passport. Why should the single Fulani herdsman be an issue to heat up the politics?
Absolutely, sir. Every sector was properly reflected, the TIVs, the Benins, and what have you. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Ekpu, the media has been blamed for fanning these embers of disunity. What is your response to that, and what should be done regarding the media and social media, which has been exploited by some for this hatred?
Well, you see, the world has changed. Technology has changed a lot of things in the world. We probably don't remember that the world is made of geniuses, sensible people, charlatans, fraudulent people, and all sorts. It's a complicated world, but technology is bringing all of these out now. Now we see all of that at once. More than a billion messages are going out every day on the internet. Reactions, responses, and so on. People are texting, sending all kinds of messages. 20 years ago, this didn't happen. So we are seeing now human beings in that true form. They've always been there. Human beings have always been there, but technology is bringing them out. People who are very brilliant, people who are very stupid, and others in between. And that is the crisis we are dealing with. How do we deal with it? We have to deal with it with education. A lot more education of the populace. In the US, you have special sites, hoaxes, that they just send anything. They just provide space for you to write your fake stories, fake news. And there are other copycat sites in the US. And they copy and reframe and repolish the stories and send to other sites. But that seems okay in a country that has 98% literacy. It is not all right in a country with very poor literacy. And even the educated persons are actually not literate enough, not brilliant enough, not responsible enough, not broad-minded enough for this generation, for this technology-driven generation. So we all have to keep talking. The sensible people, the not so sensible people, the responsible people and not so responsible. And we hope that in this conversation, the babble of voices, we can get some reason. We hope that good sense will prevail. Good sense will slaughter bad sense. Once you look at the internet, you'll see the conversation, the depth of anger in a society like Nigeria, with terrorism as an issue, with insecurity as an issue, with poverty as an issue, with politicians giving us fake stories, doing different things. It's worse in a country like Nigeria because of the divisions that we already have: religion, tribe, gender, region, religion, and so on, which have tended to give this country a more fragmentalized look. It tends towards what people call centrifugalism. How do we build a country like this? When you read the newspapers, you'll be sad. 20 years ago, this didn't happen. Technology is doing it. But we can't blame technology. Technology brings some advances. It improves people's lives. But it also has its downs.
Is impacting what the press reports. Are you saying that social media is influencing or impacting what is reported in the press?
Social media, a solution and a problem. A solution because it gives more people the chance to say what they need to say. And it's a problem because a lot of idiots get into the system and they seem to dominate the system. And such views can begin to pervade the environment and damage the conversation. We must have more intelligent voices, more people who love peace, more people who love a better society coming to say something on various issues. We must have those as the dominant voices to bring some semblance of equilibrium to the society. It's a dangerous era in which we are, and in a country like Nigeria.
You know, at the colloquium organized by the National Open University, there was a conversation around the responsibility of the media. And there was a lot of talk about citizen journalists. And in your presentation, you were very emphatic. You said there's nothing like citizen journalism, that you're either a trained journalist or you are not. Now, we live in a new era, as you yourself have pointed out, where, you know, the definition of the journalist, who is a journalist, has become very elastic. And the processing of information is not something that is done alone by journalists. And that's why I think Tundu's question about the social media is very relevant, because you find a lot of people in cyberspace who are functioning as, you know, purveyors of information and who have a lot of impact.
Yes.
So
the question is relevant, very relevant. There will be social media operators. They already are there. And they are assuming the role of journalists, trained journalists, mainstream journalists, but they are not. They're not mainstream journalists. They're not trained journalists. They just think once you have a laptop or a phone, you can send out a message. Yes, fine, good. But that's not how society must function. It must function with the achievement of the objective of disseminating truth. These people do not have the ability to disseminate truth the way mainstream journalists do. Mainstream journalists work in a structured environment. They have reporters, they have supervisors, they have line editors, they have editors, and final approving authorities. By the time you go through these wedding cake like tiers from the bottom to the top, there are checks and balances, and the story that gets out eventually is 99% accurate. It may be wrong sometimes, but it's likely arranged in such a way that it should be accurate. A number of organizations do that as mainstream media. In Newswatch, we used to have the 3-source rule. You must get three sources to confirm.
We need to take a short break, and then we'll come back to you. We'll continue with this line of thought. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us in our Abuja studio is Professor Stanley Ngua, the director of the Olusegun Obasanjo for African Studies at the National Open University of Nigeria. Now, and with us in our Lagos studio is Mr. Ray Ekpo, a frontline journalist, essayist, and writer who is with us in our Lagos studio here. Mr. Ekpo, before we went on break, you were trying to differentiate between the mainstream media and the social media in terms of how they treat news, you know, and pursue the objective of telling the truth.
And your 3-source rule, can you just explain that 3-source rule? It might be instructive for people even before they post things on social media.
I was saying that in Newswatch, we used to have what we call a 3-source rule. Every story has to be confirmed by 3 sources, and then we will accept that it's a correct story. Because you have to be rigorous about it, because it's about truth. We're talking about truth. Journalism is about publishing what is factual, what is accurate, what is truthful. And the search for truth in any society will be diminished by a lower standard of performance, a lower standard of the search for truth. And that is what the social media largely does, because it's a one-man or one-woman operation. Somebody sits down and conceptualizes something with its fertile imagination. He sends it out. Whether it's accurate or not, it doesn't check, and so on. That is not a profession. Mainstream media journalism is a profession. And it satisfies the 5 conditions of a profession. One is that there must be a body of knowledge. the body of knowledge that is used in journalism is multidisciplinary. But there is knowledge that people learn how to do it. There has to be canons of professionalism, accuracy, fairness, completeness, and so on. There has to be a code of conduct. We have a written code in journalism. There has to be entry standards. Now the new just says minimum first degree or HND. There has to be a form of regulation. NBC regulates, and the Press Council regulates, and so on, apart from self-regulation. So those 5 attributes make journalism a profession. Social media is not a profession. They don't practice it as such. Nobody calls them to order. They can do anything. That's the difference. But the truth is that we need those voices. You must make the difference between what you get on the social media and what you get in the mainstream media. I look at, whenever I see something on the social media, I go to the mainstream media, 3 or 4 mainstream media to confirm. Am I sure, is this true? And most of the time, it is not true. So that is my, that's the test that I use in accepting whether a story is true or not. And don't know whether a lot of people resort to that. And if you don't do that, you get deceived. I saw something on the social media, Chief Ernest Shonekong is dead. I said, oh my God, this man is gone. Okay, let me go and check. I checked on the mainstream media platforms, and I didn't see anything like that. And then the then governor, Senator Ibikunle Amosun, said, oh, I've spoken to the man today, so he's not dead. That means that the man was alive, but social media had killed him. Yeah.
Well, Professor Ngoa, let's come back to you in our Abuja studio. Mr. Ipu has been making a case for the mainstream media in terms of how, we get the truth told and, ensure societal equilibrium. Is the social media as guilty as he has pointed out? And is there anything like objective truth in the real sense of it? And where does the burden for telling the truth lie? Does it lie with the media, or is there a power dimension or a psychological dimension in this, in terms of the value chain of the information process?
Ruben, thank you. Let me start by saying to you, welcome to George Orwell's season of universal deceit. Fake news, like we keep saying, applies and employs all manner of tricks because it is well-resourced and aided by automated technology. But the truth is that the internet and social media, it's not a license for profiling people that you do not, whose opinions you do not agree with. It is not a license for ethnic profiling. It is not for turning truth on its head. I agree with Ray Ekbu because in mainstream journalism, and as you are aware, we have what we call real news. Real news refers to information that is verifiable in the public interest. Now, how many fake news sources are verifiable? That is why I say that truth had been turned on its head, and truth had now become a very scarce commodity. Lies had found its way into history. However, there is the good, the bad, and the ugly in the information age we live in. But I do not understand what a citizen journalism is about. Because if you have citizen journalism, why don't you have citizen doctor? Why don't you have citizen lawyer? Why don't you have citizen architect? In any case, let me put it this way simply. Journalism is everybody's child, everybody's darling, and nobody's weeping baby. And so it is the only profession I know that anybody can just walk in, and from journalism, you have food is ready kind of public intellectuals. People who want to remain relevant see journalism as a stepping stone. And so journalists and journalism practitioners have a lot to do. There is a lot to do. And managers of government information really do need to embark on public enlightenment, because with a whole load of public enlightenment, fake news at least will be minimized, and its effect on hate speech will also begin to look like, well, deja vu, we already know it.
Speaking of George Orwell, there is a perception that's been formed that some animals are more equal than others. Former President Obasanjo made a reference to that in his letter to President Buhari, saying that our diversity is being mismanaged. What is your take on this?
What is being mismanaged?
Our diversity, our ethnic diversity is being mismanaged, which has created an impression that... Do you understand the question, sir?
I'd hate to... Yes, I do. I hate to speak on subjects I'm not qualified to. In other words, I'm not qualified to begin to go into the dialectics of Olusegun Obasanjo's letter to the president. But I do agree that our diversity is acutely being mismanaged. In our diversity lies our strength. But our diversity seems to have become the major problem that is plaguing us. This is why I say that journalism and practitioners of journalists have a lot to do, and managers of public information, rather than telling lies, need to enlighten the public. Feelings are running visceral in Nigeria. Everybody has a concern, and very genuine concern too. And I will always come back to my origin. I'm an Ijaw man. The people from the South are not asking for too much. They are simply saying, we want to participate in the decision-making process of that which we produce. And then they were profiled. The Igbos get profiled. Now it is the turn of Fulanis. And so you see, as long as we continue this ethnic profiling, our diversity, rather than its strength, is beginning to look like our major problem.
Well, Mr. Ipu, let me come back to you. Yes, you've made a good case for journalism as a profession, but there are many Nigerians out there, or let's say many people out there, even internationally, who think that even the mainstream media itself cannot be trusted. President Trump is on air every day, he's on Twitter every day, accusing media channels of fake news, of hate speech, and that's in the United States. Here in Nigeria, government officials are also saying that the press boys are corrupt. They just want brown envelope, and even the journalists themselves are saying, well, they are helpless. After all, they don't get paid. So anybody that brings news, whatever news, is fair game, and it's something to be communicated to the public. How do we protect society from these internal contradictions, even within the institution that you defend so well?
Oh, that's a problem. You have corruption in the media, just as you have corruption in the university. You have corruption in hospitals and medicine, in law, and so on. You are looking at a society that has degenerated in values. That's what Nigeria is dipped. The values in Nigeria have dipped. So it affects every segment of the society, including the media. Unfortunately, the media is called the fourth estate of the realm. It's not just a business. It's a social responsibility organization which has responsibilities to do more for the country than somebody who sells rice or gari or something. That higher responsibility is there. In terms of our democracy, in terms of improving the economy, in terms of dealing with public issues and problems.
Well, Mr. Ipu, we need to take another short break. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us in our Abuja studio is Professor Stanley Ngwa, Director of the Olusegun Obasanjo Center for African Studies at the National Open University of Nigeria. And here with us in the Lagos studio is Mr. Ray Epo, the CEO of Newswatch Now. Mr. Epo, before we went on break, you were talking about, you admitted that there is corruption in the media and that could have implications for the telling of the truth. And then you said beyond being a business, media houses also have a social responsibility.
The media are not doing well in Nigeria financially. And that is a major problem. That's part of why you have this corruption that we are all talking about. Corruption has always been there, but it's worse now because all of the media are suffering. They are not doing well in terms of finance, and the adverts are disappearing. Only 2 or 3 newspapers get the bulk of the adverts, and the copy sales few. When I was editor of Sunday Times in 1981, we're doing 500 and something thousand copies. Nobody does 100,000 copies today. That is a problem. And the government ought to realize that the media are a factor, an important equation in democracy. It has to assist the media to survive. The NBC, Nigerian Broadcasting Commission, says that various television stations are owing them 4.5 billion naira in fees, licensing fees. Why don't you slash these fees so they can survive? Nigerian newspapers buy newsprint from abroad. They import it. The newsprint factory in Kuiboku in Akwa Ibom State is dead. Education comes from the media, from printed matter. The media educate, inform, and entertain. That education aspect of it is relatively reduced because they have to spend a lot of money importing newsprint. Why can't the government allow newsprint to be tariff-free, since it has not been able to resuscitate the paper companies? None of the 3 paper companies are working. The one at Iwopin, the one at Jeba, and the one at Kuiboku in Akwa Ibom State. How can a society function like that in terms of education? It means that textbooks printed here will be expensive, or the ones imported will also be expensive. The naira is grossly undervalued. I'm not an economist, but you get 360 something thousand naira for $1. In the 70s, we were traveling abroad. The naira was higher than the dollar in value. So how did we get here? We have to do something. We have to move the society forward. Unfortunately, our governments do not realize that the technology is here. There is globalization. You can't hide the sun with your finger. And that's what we're trying to do here. This society is not moving forward. It's not moving in the right direction. We're being left behind. We're being left behind, far, far behind. Our people are not well educated. Jonathan started something with their Marjories, trying to educate them. And now that has been suspended. You can't grow without educating everybody. Those will be the ones that will drag your country back, those ones you refuse to educate. Education is a solid way of conquering poverty. You can't be talking about lifting 100 million people out of poverty without making massive investment in education. The federal government of Nigeria spends less than 10% of its resources on education. UNESCO prescribes 26%. Ivory Coast spends 30% on it. Ghana, 27%. South Africa, 25.6% on the average on education. If the federal government is not spending massively on education and the state governments are not doing the same thing, and 10-point-something million people are out of school, where do you think we're going? We're going to hell. We're going to perdition. Yes, that's where we're going to. The children, you find children everywhere begging. Children out of school carrying loads and selling in the streets. That cannot save Nigeria. That cannot save Nigeria. The governments must sit down and do some thinking, think outside of the box, we are in trouble. I don't know whether you realize it. Many countries are very, very far ahead of us. Very, very far ahead of us. And what are we doing about it? Education is the key. Then, ASU will have a strike for 3 months, and then they will call off the strike, and the children will go back to school, and they rush them for 2 months and give them exams and give them certificates. That is no education. Talk to a number of university graduates today. You'll be very unhappy with yourself. So some of them can write their names. Maybe that's an exaggeration. But the quality of education is low. Yes, that is why employers today in Nigeria say, your degree must come from a university abroad, or if you have 2 degrees from a Nigerian university, maybe we can count it as one solid degree at the end of the day. Or you have a first class or second class upper division. That's why people rush, parents rush to see whether they can buy a first class or second class upper division degree for their children, so they can get a job in the workplace. If you employ people who don't have quality degrees, you will see the reality of the dip in our education.
Well, Mr. Epu, quickly, let's take Professor Ngwa's perspective on this particular subject that you have raised, about education, about enlightenment, and about government thinking out of the box. But, Prof, I'd like you to take along with this. What do we do in a situation whereby government officials also tell lies, or they refuse to say the truth? And, in that context, you have the proliferation of rumors and, the citizen trying to fill the gap on their own. What's your take on all of this?
Well, government public information managers telling lies is a recipe for chaos. And it didn't begin today, but it looks like it's much more dominant this season. The recipe for me, for the problem we are encountering, which we are in, enlightenment is the key. Government public information managers should try to tell the people the truth. Like I said, feelings are running visceral. And should every Nigerian out there come out to react exactly how he or she feels, we would have no country to call our own. It begins with government information managers. Tell people the truth. Journalism itself must have to sit back and reassess itself. In fact, there are some newspapers that are actually engage in copycat activities. They some dub from these online, information sources. But again, let's put it this way. Most Nigerians and most consumers of these social media are people who do not have access to independent sources of public information. So they are vulnerable and they're gullible. It therefore becomes the responsibility of public information managers as well as mainstream journalism to adhere strictly to the principles that dictate the practice. I quite, like I keep saying, we would leave some of this for a future day symposia discussion, because I have a problem with myself with public information managers. Some of the things that come out from public managers of information are the harbingers of hate speech. We can't call names here, we can't do that, but let government information managers begin to tell the citizenry the truth. It would make a way, it will help. It will reduce the impact of fake news and hate speech in itself. Like I said, fake news is a harbinger of hate speech. And if we have the appropriate information, hate speech will become manageable. That's what I think.
And And what do we do in the short term, in your view, with the misinformation that exists? You might recall the hate speech bill, the National Cohesion Integration Bill last year that was shut down. So we can sort of assume now that draconian legislation is not the answer, because that was proposing fines of 10 million naira, life imprisonment, or death sentence if the information you have disseminated results in the death of another person. So that was shut down. It was described as draconian and just thrown in the dustbin. But what ought to happen at this point to sort of immediately address this problem?
It depends on practitioners. Government will have to do something, but look, the truth illuminates. Truth illuminates. Fake news is a wickedness. It is deceitful. And if you tell the truth, that serves as a counter to post-truth. It serves as a counter to alternative facts. Therefore, it still boils down to the same thing, that journalism and practitioners need to sit back and reassess the entire discipline and profession. On the other hand, let government information managers tell the truth. Draconian laws and rules there are no answers to controlling social media. But the truth can, one of the greatest scholars of all time, Uthman Danfodio, says that truth is an open wound. Conscience is an open wound. Only the truth can heal it. If you use truth to counter falsehood, it helps. Because in an information environment, fake news do not only impede, it actually affects rational thinking. It does. And in an environment where you have so many hungry human beings, and there's hunger in the land, people are hungry, people are unemployed, people are ready to sell their mothers. Whatever information that comes their way that they could latch onto, they do so. Ultimately, we need truth be told. If truth is told, I think that it could counter to some manageable limit fake news.
I want to ask you about the truth, because the truth can be objective, it can be subjective. I was reading about the NEF, the Northern Elders Forum, and I was quite surprised by some of their comments. Surprised because they were expressing comments that we're more accustomed to hearing from Southern leaders. They were feeling marginalized. They were feeling ignored by the federal government. They were upset at the federal government's robust response to the tragic murder of Mrs. Olakunri, and saying that when Northerners are killed, the government does not respond in the same fashion. So the truth from their perspective is quite different from the truth from the perspective of the Southerners. How can the twain meet?
These are matters of opinion. The death of Mrs. Olakunri, some people have said, oh, it's the police said it's an armed robbery event. People said, no, it's herdsmen. So we haven't found the truth yet. They are still investigating, but I'm sure we'll get to it. Whether it's armed robbers or herdsmen that killed it. That is politics. That's the politics of it.
We're going to take a short break and we'll be back to finish the answer. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still speaking with Professor Stanley Ungoa, who is in our Abuja studios. He's the director of the Olusegun Obasanjo Center for African Studies at the National Open University of Nigeria. And here with us in Lagos is Ray Ekpo, a frontline journalist, writer, essayist, humanist, patriot, activist, and award winner. So as we were saying, sir, we're talking about the truth as opposed to opinion.
Yes. It's a matter of politics. That if the police, let me interpret it, if the police says that it's armed robbers who killed Mrs. Olakunri, who is Fashoranti's daughter, and Fashoranti is an Afenifere leader, and Afenifere has taken a position on a number of national issues, including herdsmen, farmers' crisis, including restructuring and several other things that the federal government is supposed to, including state police. If it is herdsmen that killed her, that's a complication. Complication for the federal government, a complication for everybody. It means that, the herdsmen are targeting this man's daughter because he is opposed on several platforms to the federal government, to President Buhari. So you understand the politics of it. And then the people in the Southwest who don't want herdsmen taking over their farms, taking over their territory, will say, so it's because we don't want this to happen. That's why the herdsmen are killing the daughter of our leader. So you can see the complexity. But we will get to the bottom of it. You can't hide the truth. You can't kill the truth.
But what about their perception that they'd been marginalized? The perception expressed by the Northern Elders Forum that they have been marginalized, whereas a lot of Southerners feel that they have been marginalized. So who exactly is being marginalized in today's Nigeria?
Everybody is marginalized in Nigeria. It depends on who is making the conversation.
Well, Professor Ngoa, let me come back to you. I mean, earlier on you talked about consumers of information, and I guess that's part of it. But how do consumers of information protect themselves? How do they distinguish between the truth and fake news or negative news, and what is hate speech? Considering the fact that psychologically, bad news sells, negative news sells, particularly in our post-truth, contest, and people are likely to believe the worst about anything. The social media, yes, dysfunctional as it maybe, in some regards, is not going to disappear. Government information managers will not stop telling lies in an attempt to manage information. So how do consumers of information protect themselves from being manipulated in this new contest?
Let me do last in, first out, in the sense that fake news stinks and hate speech kills. As for what consumers of cultural products have to do, is to rely a little more on independent sources of verifiable information. That brings us back to the economic question. People who are hungry, who are unemployed, who are desperate, do not have money to buy newspapers. Perhaps the transistor radios are not that expensive because radio, as a source of communication, as a means of information dissemination, had crossed the borders of literacy. If consumers of cultural products can listen a little more to conventional mainstream media, especially the radio, I'm not saying they don't tell lies, sometimes they do. And that's why yellow journalism and brown envelope had become a major topic in the study of journalism that teachers now teach at school. But being accustomed to verifiable sources of information could do the trick. That's why we come back to government telling the truth. Because every information about government is put out there. If the truth from government and those who run society can be told, the people will have to realize and begin to think twice when they see this free for all kind of information.
Well, Mr. Eku, do you agree with him? Or would you like to comment on how consumers of information can protect themselves from falsehood?
I'm not a manager of information for the government, but I think they ought to realize that the world has changed a great deal, and lies are not going to help. Public information ought to deal specifically with disseminating truth to the people. I read a statement by the former Minister of Information, Mr. Lai Mohammed, as to why Zakzaki is not released. He said something to the effect that, people in the area know that he's a troublesome man where he lives, and they will never allow him to be released because he's a troublemaker, first-class troublemaker. And then the next day, some people came out and said, but we live there. This man just does his thing quietly, doesn't disturb anybody, and so on. So the lie has been punctured by a group of people who live in that area. So even the social media, you see a lot of things being published in the social media, and others will counter and say, no, 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 this is the information. So thing happened. So you have instant responses. That's a good side about the social media. There is no authority. There's nobody who can say, who can publish lies and just get away with it. There are people out there, millions of people who are watching, who are reading, texting, and so on. That's the benefit that we have from these multiple voices in the marketplace. You can then distill the information, put the chaff aside, and take the wheat.
But at the same time, there are also people who send all these WhatsApp forwards and share willy-nilly on social media, just going, oh, sent as received, just washing their hands of any responsibility for what they're sharing, knowing on some level that it might be false. There are people who read the headlines, which are sometimes sensationalized, and don't read the fine print, and then just run with that. What do you say to those ones?
You are correct, you're correct. But you see, some researches have been done which prove that information shared are largely believed by people who think the person who is giving them the information is either their friend or their relation or is an authority on the subject, those three. So, which may not necessarily be correct at all times. So you have to be discerning when you look at information. Some say, oh, forwarded as received and so on. Where does it come from? A lot of people post false things, forwarded as received. Some just manufacture it and send. You have to make some inquiries, do some little work yourself to know what you should believe and what you should not believe. It's a free world. It's very open out there. And that is danger. That's the danger, particularly in this kind of society with so much illiteracy and very low education, and people who died in the wool, tribalists, died in the wool, politicians and religionists who have sunk their feet into the ground, right or wrong, they stay in a particular position. But of course, there are moderating forces as well. That's a good thing. There are others who are sensible, who are putting the reasonable voices in the pot. So everybody benefits. That's the beauty of democracy. That's the beauty of this technology-driven world.
Well, Professor Ngwa, just before we wrap up this conversation, in your opening sentence, you talked about the Olusegun Obasanjo Center for African Studies as an intellectual hub for the exchange of ideas. Do you want to tell us very briefly a little more about this particular center? And if you wish, why is it named after former President Olusegun Obasanjo?
I try very hard, like I said earlier, not to engage in subjects I'm not qualified to, other than telling you that Olusegun Obasanjo, like him, hate him, is a statesman, and I think had in his own way contributed to the development of this country. You may not like his opinions, you may not like his face, but we're doing purely, we're engaged in intellectual enterprise, and we think he's not only a statesman, he's a world citizen, he's a great African statesman as well. We thought we should honor him and recognize, by the way, he's a scholar in his own right. And so we thought we should do him that honor. Like I said earlier, UCAS is attuned to shaping and priming not just public debate, but to influence public policy. We are poised to, in the final analysis, generate ideas that will ultimately influence public discourse and public policy.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Stanley Ngwa. And Mr. Epu, do you want to, by way of summary, just have a parting word, particularly for journalists who must have been listening to us.
Well, thank you very much. I don't think we should break our heads over the social media. Social media information is like driving a car at top speed. It thrills, but it also kills. It can also kill. So we must take messages that we receive with a pinch of salt. We don't have to drop our guards. We check and cross-check information because our lives must be built around truth. Falsehood cannot save our society, particularly this kind of society in which the values have dipped already and education is low and so on. And I'm saying that we must buy into this era. And we shouldn't say, oh, we shouldn't have had technology doing this to us. Everything that technology brings has advantages and disadvantages. We can't take the advantages and drop the disadvantages. Education can help us.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Riepu, and thank you very much, Professor Stanley Ngwa. We're really grateful that you honored our invitation.